Oops. Hey, everybody. This is Coach Loretta, and I'm here with Coach Reese with the Dirt Trail Running Podcast, The Coffee with Coaches. And today we're going to talk about a really relevant situation, I think, for most of us, especially in the Midwest and maybe even in the East Coast. There's a lot of snow happening, a lot of crazy weather. We've had from rain to snow to cold to wind. And I don't know about you, Reese, but my messages have been blowing up with athletes. Like, what am I going to do with my workout? Or how should I handle this workout? What should I be wearing? I have a race coming this weekend and it's going to be really cold. What should I do? So we thought it would be really fitting today to have a conversation about some really some tips that we've learned along the way that maybe would be able to help and share with everybody. But first, I would be amiss if I didn't share this. Reese finished first overall at Frozen Gnome on a snowy, slippery course. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was an interesting day. I've been kind of struggling since the beginning of December with a little foot injury and had to do a lot of cross training, and then was finally able to get back into some mileage and hit like a gnarly sinus infection. So it wasn't even until like 3 or 4 days before the race I felt like, okay, I have gears where I can kind of push. So it was nice to just go and start the day and just kind of take the effort as it came and just keep going. So
Nice.
thanks to her and everyone cheering and supporting, and I stayed there until the end and had a great time chatting with everybody. So thanks for all the kudos, and thanks for stopping and talking with me out there. I think we have to do best to keep each other warm when it's 20 degrees outside, and good conversation is good for that.
Nice. And I think we'll get into it a little bit later in the conversation, talking about maybe adjusting a little bit on race day when the conditions aren't quite what we expected and the snow comes and the mud and it's slippery. So we'll get there in a bit, but let's start out and talk about gear. I think that's super big question that I see all over Facebook and chats. I hear people talking about it. Like, what am I going to wear? Even my running group, sometimes we message each other like, what are you wearing today? Temperature is this, what should we wear? So what's one of your favorite things? Let's start from our head and work our way down. What's your favorite thing for face cover, head cover?
So in the theme of thinking about this podcast, what don't we know? If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you've run out in the cold before. But newsflash, at least in the Chicago area here, we're gonna hit some sub-zero temperatures. And although I wouldn't necessarily advise going out and running hard in like sub-zero weather, if you're gonna go out, one thing that I would definitely think about that maybe you haven't thought about is putting some Vaseline on your nostrils. Nothing's worse than having a chapped nose. And when you're blowing boogers all the time, and they have like good little finger like swipers, but like you still get rubbed raw. So put some Vaseline or some chapstick, I've heard people say, on their nose works really well, just to keep it from blistering, because nobody wants to go to work, later in the day with like a rubbed raw nose.
Right. Oh, that's good. So one of my things, I really like to cover my eyes because I don't like the feel of the snow or the freezing rain hitting into my face, and putting some sunglasses on, even if it's not sunny, it helps me to kind of keep that off of my eyes. Sure, you have to wipe them off every once in a while, but it kind of protects me and makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, and like when it's this cold out, like I personally love running in the snow. And sometimes what'll make it hard is you hit that headwind and you just get pelted in the eyes. I mean, sometimes like if anybody's ever like gone swimming in a chlorine pool, which is hopefully most of you, you get out and your eyes are kind of burnt, like they've kind of like, they've been through some trauma. Sometimes it can be like that when you're running out in the snow too, and you get little ice pellets in your face. Let alone like it just kind of sucks like getting hit in the cheeks with ice and snow, but it's beautiful. Like I want to be outside when the snow is falling, but not always are we going to get the opportunity to go out and run when the snow is just gently trickling down. Sometimes it's going to be blowing in your face. And yeah, those goggles are fantastic. I know some people that have done like snowboarding goggles, and some snowboarding goggles actually have like a nose piece, like this like little nose covering just to protect your nose as well. I've never used goggles before, so I don't know like quite about those, but when I do my like DIY home projects, like I don't like wearing those type of goggles on my face just because I feel like it restricts my view a little bit. But like what I'll do is I'll take my sunglasses and I'll go out even if it's a great day. I know a lot of companies too, they make these cool like photochromatic lenses where it's like if it's light outside, your glasses are lighter, or excuse me, they're darker. And if it's dark outside, your glasses are lighter, just so you can kind of like see better. So that might be a good option looking for their eye protection.
Yeah, nice. The other thing I like, I guess it depends on if it's hot, what the temperature is. Sometimes it's nice to just wear one of those head bandanas that kind of go around and not have it on my full head. Because I think it's kind of important to, sometimes we think, oh, snow, it's really cold, and it's really not as cold as it is just snowy. And if we overdress, we can get into trouble too, right? Because then we start sweating, and then that causes a whole nother bunch of issues. So, dressing just right, I think is key. So sometimes it's a hat that covers my whole head, but other times it's just that little bandana that just kind of goes around my cut to cover my ears, but keeps my head open.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I actually just had this the other day. Like I go for runs on my work breaks, and like right before we go on break for lunch, uh the clinic gets cold. It's like there's not quite as many people. Like the heater unit has kind of kicked down a little bit because it's been warm, and it's kind of that lag time between like it's not kicked on, it's not quite 70 degrees, it's just cooling down. My body temperature is low. So it kind of sucks like starting a run when you're already kind of cold, because of course we want to dress like down a little bit because we're going to go out running. And I think that's a great idea. I know some people that wear like the buffs is almost like a pirate bandana,
Yeah.
you know, tuck them in if it's colder, and then kind of bring it around your brow if it's warmer, um, bring it around your neck too. So I think that like, for how much those buffs weigh, like, of course it's going to be a great option to just like have in your bag, or like have at your disposal, whether you take it or not. Like, you can use it as a booger egg. I only mention boogers because when it's this cold outside, like, of course, like the nose, like a lot of people deal with, I believe it's called rhinosinusitis, where your nose just runs. You're not sick, it's just runs when it's cold. So there's a lot of people out there that do need to take special considerations for the drippage.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the next piece is depending on how cold it is, especially if it's windy, I do like to sometimes have my neck covered.
Mm.
You could use the buff, or Smart Wool, I know is what I have, has this nice neck cover that you can put on. You can put up over your mouth if you need something to breathe into if the air is super cold. So then, you can kind of push it up and down. That's sort of nice to have if it's pretty cold out. I mean, and this is not just 30-degree cold. I would do that when it's, colder than that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And one of my favorite pieces of cold weather gear is, I believe it's a Smart wool balaclava. So it goes down by my brow, it covers my entire head, the back of my neck, and then it has just this little flap that goes up and down. I can bring it over my chin, I can bring it over my lips, my nose, bring it up as high as I need to. But the nice thing is too is like, let's say you're cold, you start off with that thing like this, all bundled up, you put another hat on top of it, you throw your hood over that on your outer layer, and all of a sudden you're getting warm, you can start stripping all that stuff down. And like for me, like I get really claustrophobic if the back of my neck is muddy. And if you have all of the layers, like I get super claustrophobic. So all of a sudden I'm peeling all of them off, and then I get down to that balaclava layer like this, right? Well, since it's a hole right here, you can take that entire hood off, drop the balaclava, and then it's basically just a neck gaiter. So I think
Right.
like, for a piece of gear that like is so modifiable, like if you take your hat off, you got to stuff it somewhere. Maybe you don't have a pack, like whatever it is. But that balaclava, if I tear it off, boom, it's done. It's just hanging on my neck, keeping my neck warm, and then I can just as easily pull it back over my head, draw the face cover up, put my hood on in case it starts snowing, or there's definitely days where the temperature starts in the 30s and then drops as the day goes on. So if you're out there for like a long run, fantastic piece of modifiable gear for sure.
Nice. One of my favorite things I think about winter running is all of the photos that we see of people with frozen hair and eyelashes and eyebrows. Do you have any of those?
Oh my God, for sure. And like the hard thing is with that is that like sometimes your eyelids get so full of snow that they get heavy, and it's hard to keep your eyes open.
Me too.
Um, Times where it's like I'm trying to like peel them off of my eyes, or I'm blinking, and all of a sudden like my eyelid just gets like they
Stuck.
get so yeah, I mean like that's where the glasses come in handy, right? Like everybody likes the cool like ice beard, like that's awesome, but like I don't know, us trail runners need to see every once in a while, right? So like running is like I'll put my hands over my face and I'll breathe, like I'm warming up my hands just so some of that air gets back up into my eyelashes. And then I'll take like, my glove or something like that and just pat them dry so that that doesn't then freeze. And that really only happens if it's like 15 degrees or below and it's snowing at the same time. So it doesn't happen all the time, right? But like like there's not a point at any point of the day where I want to be blind. So
For sure, for sure.
good
So
consideration.
yeah. So next, I think kind of moving down to, what we wear. Like I like to wear a base layer. I usually wear, I'm a big Smartwool fan. So a base layer of Smartwool. And then probably my favorite winter piece is a vest. Because if you keep your core warm, then you're going to keep the rest of your body warm is, the way I feel. And so in the vest, you can start with it zipped up, you can unzip it, if it gets a little bit warmer, but I feel like it's a good way to keep, your core warm, even when your arms maybe just have that light base layer.
Yeah, for sure. And I think layering is the trickiest thing for people because it depends or it differs like every 10-degree benchmark. Like I layer differently when it's 20 degrees outside. I layer differently when it's 30 degrees outside. So like, for us that are into logistics and coaching and have all these spreadsheets, like you can write down base, mid, and then outer layer and then the degree, and then just jot down things that work well, good pairings. Maybe when it's 20 degrees, a good pairing is this base layer, this mid, and then that outer layer, just to keep a rolling mental gauge. Because I mean, we've had a really awesome winter so far, just being so mild that like it's definitely different when it's 35 degrees outside versus when it's 25 degrees outside. And like for Frozen Gnome, for example, like you go through 365 days almost of not having to worry about ice on the ground, your layers, you get used to one thing, and all of a sudden, like, boom, we have this one race day where it's like 20 degrees at the start. It's currently snowing and there's snowpack on the ground. It's like, shoot, I haven't ran in these conditions in a long time. I forget exactly what I need to be comfortable and to have traction. So
Yeah.
that's just like a rolling tally, like year over year of like, hey, like if it's snowy, like if it's 20 degrees, if it's 15 degrees. So I think that's like a key piece of information is just like, you don't have to keep all of this up here. Even just writing
Mhm.
it like a good idea.
I think another thing is not just seeing what your friends are wearing, because I think we all have different core body temperature. I run hot. And so I'm going to be probably dressed lighter than most other people. How about you? Do you run hot or do you run cold?
Man, it's changed over the years. I mean, I want to say when I first started racing, maybe like 2017, 2018, I was a lot lighter weight than I am right now, and I was fairly anemic. So I had some health problems, and I ran really cold. So I would bundle up all the time. Since then, my stress levels have gone down. My weight has gotten into like a nice, healthy place. And now, like, I run really hot, and it feels great because I don't have to worry about, taking as many layers. I don't have to worry about like bundling up and freezing super bad. So one thing, as it's changed over the years, one thing that I really like is if it's like around 30s, like I'm wearing a t-shirt, I'm wearing a wind jacket if it's not raining or snowing outside, and that's perfect for me because you can roll up the sleeves, you can unzip it a little bit, you can take it completely off, and my windbreaker actually like flips inside out and has a little strap, so it just kind of like slides over my hand. So like I practice with that stuff on my daily runs is like, hey, I'm at Veteran Acres, like it's 40 degrees. I'm gonna start with my windbreaker and a couple bottles in my hand and just practice like having two bottles in my hands, stripping my layers off, packing them up. And that's one thing, like say for Frozen Gnome, for example, is like practice, 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 right? Like I think a key thing that people don't think about is like, hey, when you have more gear, you have to practice running and maneuvering with that gear, whether it's taking layers on or taking them off, putting them on, whatever it is. Do that when you're running because then when you're racing, it makes things a lot more fluid for sure. And I don't think people quite think about, hey, if I'm running, I want to practice the way that I'm going to race.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think as we start to layer, it changes our rate of perceived effort too, because now we're getting a little bit more weight on us, the more things that we're putting on, and we're used to being able to run light and free. And then all of a sudden now we have a little bit of restriction. And I think it can change that too. So
Yeah.
let's move down to legs. I do like to wear when it's really whoa, we missed our hands. You're good point. All right, let's go out our hands. So I'm a fan of here, I like to wear Smartwool mittens. I guess I'm a Smartwool fan, but and I like them because I can take them off and hold them in my hand, and they're like a security blanket for me. So then when I need them back on, I can put them back on because oftentimes my hands will get too warm, but I can easily put those on and off, and that's one of my favorite things. If it's not real cold, I'll just use like my shirt that has like a finger hole and just kind of, be able to tuck my hand in a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's great. And like there's those modifiable gloves like that you just mentioned where they flip around. I have some that are like gloves and they flip over into mittens. My girlfriend has some that are basically just like a sleeve that you can just wear around your wrist as the gauntlets. If anybody's seen my Instagram reel, or you can flip them over as mittens. Those are pretty cool. Um, but for people that have like really sensitive fingers, like we can layer our hand situation the same way that we can layer like the rest of our situation. Um, for example, like if you go into REI, you'll see gloves and you'll see the labels on those gloves. You have your like lighter glove, the fingered style gloves. Maybe they're really thin, maybe they're a little bit windproof, but they're not really all that thick. Um, those guys will be labeled base layer, just like every other base layer, right? And then you can buy, I think I don't know what the material is, but it's a windproof material that's like a shell. It's almost like more of a mitten, a real thin mitten. So you
Mhm.
can buy a mitten and you can put those on, and that would be great for like temperatures that are like maybe 20s to 30s or so. But then you can go one step further and have an outer layer of glove, just like you would have an outer layer shell, and then you can put on one of those heavier duty like claw mittens. So I mean, you can layer your fingers for the people like my girlfriend has crazy Raynaud's. Like she'll go down the refrigerator aisle of Walmart in June, and in 5 minutes her fingers are ghost white.
Oh, wow.
So she's a good example of somebody that like tries to take into consideration like, hey, let's layer up our fingers just as we would layer up like the rest of our body. So if you have a problem and you can't find a glove that is like the perfect glove, chances are you're not going to, because you can layer them, and that's how you can really design your comfort with your hands.
And I'm glad you brought up Raynaud's because I think we have a lot of people with the Raynaud's. Is that how you say it? Raynaud's just syndrome or whatever, where your fingers start turning, colors and all of that good stuff, and it can impact your run. So I have some athletes that do that, and some of them will pre-prep. Maybe they'll throw some things in the dryer to get them warm before they go outside, so that so they start out warm and they stay a little bit warmer. They'll also do some things inside, burpees, something to get them going and warmed up before they go outside, so they're warm when they're going out into the cold. And that seems to have helped them by doing that. So some little tricks that you can do too. Does she do any tricks?
No, but I should tell her about it because that's something that I do when it's really cold. Is I call it like pre-warming, and it's just like a
Mhm.
warm, but like I'll do like 10 to 20 real quick push-ups. Like I'm not really focused on like hypertrophy, so I'm not doing the strict push-up and like really holding the isometrics and controlling the eccentrics. I'm just pushing as fast as I can, so that way I can generate some body heat, generate some
Mhm.
muscular heat to improve I guess responsiveness of tissues.
Right.
10 to 20 quick push-ups. I'll do 10 to 20 quick air squats, maybe a couple lunges. And most of the time that I'm going out in the morning, it's like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, right? So like I try to do these things that don't involve jumping around so I don't wake people up. Um, uh, what I've done too is I've done like tricep dips on a counter, like, not full range of motion, but tricep dip is another good way to warm up like your upper body and your legs too. If you're
Mhm.
just got your shoes on, ready to go out the door, but you're like, oh man, I could get just a little bit warmer. And then it makes the first like 10 minutes where everybody knows like, oh, for the first 10 minutes of running, like you're usually pretty cold and then you'll warm up to it. Well, if you put all your layers on and you do that stuff, you're going to pre-warm yourself and pre-warm your layers. So that way, when you go outside, now we can take that first 10 minutes of your run and already be in a decent stride instead of
Yeah.
like shivering as we're just kind of like surviving.
Yes. Yes. It makes it a little easier to go out to that first step. Because running in the cold and running in the snow is really fun, but the first step out the door sometimes is a little hard to get yourself nudged out there.
Especially if it's 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 in the morning and it's already dark and it feels like it's midnight outside. Like any way that you can make the morning a little bit more easier is dynamite for sure.
Right, right. Okay, so now we can go on down to the legs, I think. Well,
Okay,
did I miss something else?
yes. Okay, so I just wanted to mention DIY things, right? Like everybody knows I like to modify my own gear because it's a creative outlet for me, because I get to really custom tailor my things. Well, I've had pairs of gloves that I love and are great insulators. They're great for certain temperatures. I'm used to them, but they don't have the critical piece that every glove should have, and that's the booger patch. So what you have like an old t-shirt, or if you have like an old cloth that's comfortable, you have an old blanket or something like that that's plush, you can take a little patch of that and you can get some like Gorilla Glue or some sort of epoxy, and you can epoxy that to the back of your glove, to like the little thumb side here, to the finger. You can cut it out so it's actually kind of like in the shape of an L around your finger, right? So like if you have a dynamite pair of gloves but they don't have a booger patch, add a booger patch. Do you have here, like, I'm a huge fan of custom tailoring and custom modifying all of my stuff for sure.
Well, I'll be watching for Reese's reel on creating that.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
do that.
yeah, you should. So, okay, now we can go on down to the legs that are freezing now because we've taken so long to get there. Um, usually if it's cold, you know, I have a couple of different pairs of tights that I'll pull out. One pair that doesn't has a windbreaker will be when it's really cold. So it has the wind patches on the front so the air can't go quite through it. And then I have another pair that doesn't have those. I tend to wear the ones that don't have the windbreaker on them most because again, I run pretty hot. But if it's really bitter cold, like 0 wind chill, you know, like really cold, that's when I'll grab those and that will help. But I also, and if it gets down to that cold, then I might put on a extra layer of a skirt to also cover that top of your area and your butt. So it kind of keeps you a little bit warmer having that warmed up too.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And like that's the first time I've heard of that because of course I've never worn a skirt while running, but it makes sense. I mean, I wonder if there's companies that even make like windproof skirts, just to like cover that area. And I
Yeah.
guess like topic, like you can absolutely find like windproof undies, especially for guys that have windproof linings on those certain spots that you don't want to get cold. That's fantastic. They even have those for biking too, because that's one place that like air gets trapped. So if you can't find anything like running specific, like cycling specific is great too. Um, like my personal preference when I'm layering my legs is that I would rather go heavier on the legs and lighter on the top. Well, not lighter on the top. Let me rephrase that. I would rather go heavier on the tights, and I would rather have more layers on top, more thin layers that I can strip off as I need to. The reason behind that is because, like, say I'm running a race, I'm running a long run, whatever it is, like in order to change my tights, like I'm stripping my shoes off, right? And I totally understand people out there that don't run in tights. I don't understand how you do that. But anyways, you can slip them off like underneath your shoes without taking them off. That's totally cool. But my thing is that like I want to keep my legs warmer because having warmth in your muscles helps the pliability of the tissue. It helps the elasticity of the tissue. It helps oxygen diffusion of the tissue. And same for the tendons too. So like one thing I take into consideration is the Achilles tendon. If you look at the back of your leg all the way down by your ankle, everybody knows that Achilles tendon spot, but like, I mean, it's basically covered by like a thin level of skin and maybe a tiny bit of adipose tissue. It doesn't have a lot of insulation. So if that thing gets cold, you're going to have a real hard time dorsiflexing and plantar flexing, which is bringing your toes up and bringing your toes down. And I mean, if you can't do that, you can't really run, especially on trails going up and downhill. So I like to wear my tights and then I'll wear taller socks just to make sure that I like double up on that area because that tendon needs all the help that it can get. And then when it comes to like my upper body, it's like that's when I'll have like, like the base layer, like 2 other layers, and then maybe like a windy or like a puffy if it's really cold on top, because I can strip those off. I want to keep my legs nice and warm. The reason why I personally love tights is because it doesn't create this micro environment. When we have material between our legs and, or not material, when we have air between our legs and the material that we're wearing, it creates a little sweat environment where, the temperature is warmer. Like air or moisture gets trapped in that warmer air, and then you can have condensation that builds up on the outside of that layer. So I personally think it's really uncomfortable. So if you wear something that's tight against the skin, it wicks your sweat and it just lets it evaporate off. So it's less likely to just kind of like sit in this microclimate, because wetter air feels a heck of a lot colder. So if you're running and then all of a sudden you have to stop and you have to hike, now all that warm air that's trapped inside in that micro environment between your leg and the layer is going to get pretty cold pretty fast. So I do know a lot of people that will layer like tights and then maybe like a windproof layer that's over the top of them for really cold conditions. I think that's a pretty good idea, especially because most of those like windy bottoms are like parachute pants. Like I have some that I carried for a race that is now known as Frigid Fox. Back then it was called Frozen Otter Ultra. Um, and so I pack those because they basically weigh nothing, and or they weigh nothing, and it was just that extra security of like, hey, when it's nighttime and it's like negative whatever degree temperature, like I have those that I can just slip on pretty quick.
Yeah.
Like really cold layering situations that other people might not have thought of.
Yeah, I have a pair of pants that are my favorite. They're but by Craft, but they zip all the way up my leg, so they're
Mhm.
super easy on off. But they're a nice windbreaker. They keep you nice and warm, but so easy to remove on and off. Don't have to take off your shoes or anything. So getting something like that, I think, is super handy, especially if you're doing something, a race or something that you're going to be moving slow later, and you're going to need an extra layer because you're not keeping yourself warm. So yeah,
Mhm.
so I guess next would be shoes. So talk a little bit about shoes. We were talking a little before the podcast about some of the ideas that you have with shoes and things that you've used and some of your experiences with getting frozen.
Awesome. Yeah, let's talk. So I think we can wrap this up in like the shoes, like socks, traction type of conversation. So just the shoe itself, like if you want like a dynamite, like winter shoe, there's a lot of companies out there that make like winter specific running and trail shoes. I think the leader in the winter industry is a brand called Icebug. They're fantastic. Don't quote me on this. I think they're from like the Norwegian area, somewhere around there. So of course, super snowy, super slick. But they have some shoes that have like nano spikes kind of built into them, and they can really claw. They can claw some ground pretty good. There's also other weatherproof shoes, such as like Ultra has their weatherproof line. I think they're called All Weathers. I could be wrong on that. But you'll be able to find it on the website really easy. Solomon also has like their water resistant, like higher insulated line as well. So you might have to do a little digging for your favorite company of choice. But those are just a handful of ones that I know of off the top of my head that make dynamite winter shoes for sure. But let's say like, hey, like you don't have the budget, or maybe your race is tomorrow and you need to modify your shoes. You need to go out and get something pretty quick. You don't have time to break in new shoes. I would say that like if you're going to be out on like icy or snowy conditions, probably like the best thing that you could do in a snap would be to put some sheet metal screws in your shoes. So I know a lot of people that do this. I've done it a couple times myself. It works well. Here's the gist. You want to take screws that are about a quarter inch in length, something that's not going to like poke through the bottom of your outsole. I would personally use shoes that maybe are closer towards the end of their life, but are still like race ready. Just because I don't want to be like screwing my shoes that only have like 50 miles in them for sure. But if they don't poke all the way through the outsole layer, like you're not at risk of like injuring your toes. You're not at risk of getting liquid into your shoes from the bottom. But you can also take that quarter inch sheet metal screw and kind of line it up on the outside and kind of eyeball different spots of your outsole to see like, oh, maybe you have a high drop shoe and closer towards the toes. It might be at risk of poking through that outer sole. Maybe you don't put a bunch there. You put a couple in the midfoot and the back of the heel. So I think that's fantastic. I know people that live and die by that. Just be careful to count your screws and make sure that when you're running, you don't have a couple that pull off, especially in like the parking lot or close to the car. You don't want to be running over anything. But then I think there's the more robust, let's call it like the outer layer of our shoes, right? And Loretta, you can take these and detail them if you'd like, but there are these things called nanos, micros, yak tracks. Like, what's the difference between those outer levels? And like, give us a quick rundown of what they are.
Right. So the nanos are more like a very small spike that you barely notice. It's very small, tiny. They have like a rubber piece that goes over your shoe. You kind of put it over your toe and then up over your heel. Those are what I tend to use, but you also have to be a little bit careful with the positioning because it can rub your toes. So be mindful when you're placing that it's placed right on your shoe so it's not getting into your toes and doing rubbing the entire time you run. Those are great, but if you
And these are just like slipper coverings that go
yeah,
over.
they're like, yeah, they kind of just cover right over the bottom of your shoe. They start at the toe and then they come up your heel. And
Mhm.
those are great, especially if there's ice and there's snow. If you run into patches that are more you like maybe you're on some pavement or on some limestone, you might start like feel the clip clop, of like spikes because now the ground is bare and you hear it. That kind of gets a little bit annoying with those, but otherwise I think they're pretty good and they help, minimize the fall. So the micro spikes are longer spikes, so they're pretty big spikes. You're gonna want to be in some deeper snow or deeper ice using that. And then the last one I would be the yak tracks, and they're kind of like spirals, I guess, that go on the bottom of your shoe. Again, kind of go on just like the nano spikes with a part on your toe and the part on your heel, but they're crisscross pieces of spiral that go on onto the shoe. All of them are nice because they're pretty portable too. So if you start out with them and then you decide you don't need them, you can slip them off, throw them into your pocket, I think, or wrist around your wrist, to finish your run if you decide that you don't want them, or vice versa. If you start out thinking you don't need them and you have them with you, you can always pop them on.
Yeah, I think too, like to describe them as well, like the nanos are almost like little track spikes that you just like slip on the
Yeah,
bottom.
that's what I would say, track spikes. Yep.
And then the micros are more like micro crampons where it's more like mountaineering grade. So like they're definitely a little heavier. It feels like you're wearing like a shoe and a half, but like you'll be able to walk up like a vertical sheet of ice. Like for anybody out there, like last winter, I was using some micros at Veteran Acres. And of course, like the feet feel a little bit heavier, your hip flexors, glutes get a little bit more taxed. But like in Stearns Woods area, when you're going up like Butt Slide Hill and it's completely iced out, you're going up like any other section that's just like a vertical wall. Like if it's icy, I'm having zero problem. I'm digging my feet in, like I'm climbing like nobody's business. And then yeah, like those yak jacks, it's almost like little like pieces of coil, like barbed
Yeah.
wire that underneath your foot. I know a lot of people, and Yak Track has different like levels
Yeah,
of
they
their
do.
bikes. They have some that are better for like road conditions. Like say if
Mhm.
it's out or if it just snowed and roads aren't plowed out because like I'm not going to take my spikes, my micro spikes, little angle irons for mountaineering. I'm not going to take those on concrete conditions because it's just going to grind them up, and it's
Right. Yeah.
so like you need to be in some hard packed snow, something with a little bit of bite to it. And then I do know Black Diamond also has like their diamond grip, and it's basically the same thing. Like underneath, it's like a diamond coating of these little like circles on your forefoot and then
Okay.
your that just also again like help to dig into those slicker surfaces. So like when I'm running in the wintertime, like I'm wearing a pack and I'm carrying those regardless because let's say like I plan on just being in like Wingate Prairie at Veteran Acres and I know it's not crazy slick or there's a bunch of elevation. I kind of know myself and like eventually I'm gonna want to go over to Stearns Woods and like go up and down some good grades. So to just have them on just in case is fantastic. That Stearns Woods area, like closer towards the spring when we get those freeze thaw cycles, like it is slick. So it's just good to have that like the option. Wear your trail shoes and then also just have those on your back because again they weigh like nothing.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so they're
And I think
fantastic.
they'll be aware that wearing those may change a little bit of your gait. It's going to change some of the muscles that you're using, and you might be sometimes your Achilles might be a little irritated afterwards, or your heel or that's my experience, from running a little bit differently in those. So I mean, it's not anything that doesn't go away, but it is something that you might feel afterwards that you're not used to. Um, so I think we've kind of covered. Have we covered from top to bottom?
So I want to mention one other thing that I haven't heard other people try, but they do make waterproof socks. Here's the thing though, the caveat is that they're not all that comfortable. So make them waterproof is that it's basically this silicone sock sleeve that they then like wrap cotton around. So I have some, it's weird because you slip them onto your foot. They're kind of hard to get on. And when your foot is inside of them, you feel like you're in a plastic bag almost, like you're in like a silicone bag. Um, and what's nice is some of my shoes that are a little bit more worn out, a little bit stretched out, maybe I bought them a little bit big. Those socks are a little thick, so they'll kind of like fill the spaces. So it'll prevent your feet from getting all of that wet. But let's say like you go and you do get your feet wet, they'll still get pretty cold just because of the water that's around them. And one thing too to notice is that when you're wearing those, if your feet tend to sweat anyways, like it's going to create that microenvironment, right? Like it can't, there's no water that's going to get in from the top of the silicone, but all that water that's in the bottom of your foot isn't going to be able to evaporate either. Some of the cotton will soak it up a little bit. But I mean, for people that really don't like getting their feet wet, or let's say, for Potawatomi, everybody says there's creek crossings, things like that. If you're somebody who's like I don't like wet feet, that might be an option for you. But again, like we talked about, like practice this stuff in training, like try it out. I think they're only like 15 or $20 a pair. So if you don't like them, like, no skin back, I suppose. But it's another option for foot layering for sure.
Okay. And I think we might have forgot to mention gaiters.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I was in a race, again, with what's now Frigid Fox. And I didn't really even think to consider putting gaiters on for the snow, but if it keeps the sand out, it'll keep the snow out. And one thing that really injured me for, I'd say probably like 3 weeks after the race was that like after spending 16 hours like post-holing through snow, I had these little ice blocks that developed around my ankles. So I couldn't even really move my ankles all that much. So I'm running with stiff ankles and that ice is just digging into my
You're like a
ankle.
penguin out there.
Honestly, yeah, it was pretty brutal. And then for like 3 weeks after that, like the tendons were just kind of like mangled up because again, like there's not much padding around your foot area. And I saw a couple people wearing those gaiters and I was like, of course. So if nobody is out there has thought about wearing gaiters in winter, like do it. Can be a game changer for sure. Protect those ankles, protect the Achilles. Get
And there's
moving.
winter gaiters that you can get that are more, waterproof versus just gaiters that we might wear on a dirt trail, right?
Yep. Yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we kind of switch to the cross training topic?
I think I feel pretty good about our clothing. I think that we've given them some good tips and hopefully people can try them. If people are listening to our podcast and have other tips, feel free to drop us a message and we'll post that out there too. But yeah, let's move on to thinking about nutrition and hydration, right? So now we're all warm and we're feeling good out there, but we need to stay hydrated and we need to take in some nutrition, and the cold, or if it's severely cold, can cause some havoc with that. So let's talk a little bit about some tips that we can do to prevent, let's say, our water from freezing.
Loretta, I think you have some great tips for this one, so why don't you take it away?
Okay. All right. So, my first experience was a race that I didn't expect to be that cold and I wasn't prepared for that cold. And I had a hydration vest on in a bladder. And by the first section where I was supposed to meet my crew, it was already frozen. The entire straw was frozen. I wasn't drinking anything. So basically at that point, I threw my vest off because I was just carrying extra weight of frozen water. And it was like, okay, now I need to be smarter with that. So I learned some tricks that I like to do. Like you can cut in a little bit of vodka into your water. It doesn't take much. You have a big bladder of water and you put I think it's like a teaspoon or so of vodka in there to just give it a little bit so that it doesn't freeze. But then the next thing, so I tried that. The next thing I discovered is, oh, you need to run it through your line and through the straw, because if you don't, then that part freezes. So if you're going to cut in some vodka, make sure you run it through the line and suck through your straw so you get it in the nipple of it too. So it's all run through, or you're going to be in the same situation. But also, if you don't want to add alcohol into your water, you're going to add such a small amount, you won't even taste it most likely. But if you don't want to do that, some people like to heat up their water before they fill their bladders or their water bottles so that they're going out with their water a little bit warmer, so it takes a little longer to freeze. But again, make sure you run the warm through your straw. And then another thing is really if you have a hydration bladder and you're using the long straw or bottles with long straws, keeping it close to your body so you can keep your body temperature, keeps it warm enough so it doesn't freeze as well. So you would want to stick that straw like right close to your body and then just get it out when you're taking a drink and then putting it back in there. I think those are huge things. And then when we're thinking about food, it's the same thing. I don't know if you've ever had a gel that's froze up on you and you're counting on that. It's no fun, so thinking about that ahead of time and putting it near your body so that it stays warm. Or if you have, even like if you're taking bars or something, they can get crunchy out there, or the little, like shot blocks or whatever, they get hard and then makes them really hard to chew. So put them close to your skin.
For sure. And like I think that outer layer like over the bladder is huge. Like of course we want to look cool when we're running, and it's definitely not the coolest look to have like a turtleback and but such a big difference. And when the goal is to get from point A to point B, finish the race, like finish strong, like who cares what you look like? Like sometimes when you're in those races, it's more about like survival, than like looking like, yay, I'm a runner. Sometimes just freaking bundle everything up.
For sure, for sure.
But yeah, nothing's worse than like that frozen goo or that frozen chomp block. Because now it's like, shoot, I'm already cold and I'm putting this cold thing like in my mouth. It's gonna like cold, like cool down my body temperature from the inside out. So yeah, keep your food warm. Like keep it as close to your body as possible. I think that's amazing.
For sure. And there's a lot of fun winter races. I have athletes as well that just did Tuscobia, not as cold and snowy as it normally is. This weekend is St. Croix 40 that's coming up. So many like fun cold races, and they all have requirements too of what you need to take with you. So that's been kind of a topic I've had a lot with my athletes, because Tuscobia, normally you carry a sled and you have a requirement of some things to take. And this year you wouldn't pull a sled because it wasn't snowy. So it became a backpack issue and carrying a backpack. And, that takes another whole challenge, especially if you haven't been planning for it. I had athletes that are training some of these winter races and they've been pulling sleds to train. And then all of a sudden there's no snow. And now we're switching, to a backpack. So I have an athlete doing St. Croix this weekend that knows that we're not going to have snow. So she's been trying out different things and, talking to people in her group. Some people are thinking about like strollers to push their gear because they have a large amount of requirements in this race. Maybe taking a backup sled if they get a tiny bit of snow, or some people are just going to carry a pack. But I mean, her pack is looking like it's going to be close to 40 pounds. So if you're not used to that, that's a huge difference in your race, so be thinking about that, because we never know what a race is going to throw us. And this year it's causing us a little bit more thought on the different weather that we're having, I think. And, for that particular race, also, you're supposed to, I believe they have to carry all of their hydration. So a good tip too, since normally you have a sled, now she's going to have a pack, is, using an insulated thermos to keep things so is not freezing out there for you as well, I think is a tip that a lot of people use. So, and this race, has some other twists to it that are kind of interesting. You start in a bivvy at the start line, have to get out and you have to go and you have to pack your stuff up. You have to start a fire while you're out there. So like all of those things, if you're thinking of winter races, like really look at what are the rules and make sure you're practicing those before the race, because you don't want to go on race day and not have tried any of those things and have that be part of your requirement.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm running a little bit low on time, Loretta, so excuse me for
Yes.
long here. But okay, so we have two more things that we really wanted to talk about, and that
Yes.
was cross training and dehydration when it's cold. So maybe I'll take the cross training, and then we could talk about the dehydration.
Sure.
When it's really cold, I'm never ever gonna blame an athlete for staying inside. Because of course, if it's really cold, you're not going to be able to push as hard, right? So what I would recommend to people is, if it's cold and you don't feel like you can run a workout outside, but you can still get outside, consistency is the most important thing, right? So get out there, log your miles in. Closer towards the summer when it's time to race, you're not going to miss that one tempo run that you didn't complete, but your body's going to know if you consistently skip days or decide to do nothing at all. So if it's cold, you don't feel like you can run hard, run easy. But if it's so cold that you're like, man, running easy is just going to hurt my lungs, stay inside. If you can be on the treadmill, awesome. Do your workout that way. If you don't have a treadmill and you have a bike trainer like me, go on the bike trainer, log those heartbeats. I like to think about time and heartbeats as opposed to like distance, right? Like, so today I didn't do any running. So if you look at my Strava logs, it's like, oh shit, like 30 miles for the week. Like, ooh, it's so low. But I've accumulated about 4 hours of biking this week too, in a 2 hour bike workout earlier today, where my average heart rate was about like 148. So boom, there's basically a long run on the bike with zero impact stress, like no time spent outside when it's super freezing, and it's a little bit easier on my lungs coming out of the sinus infection. So
Right.
mission accomplished. I completed my cardiovascular goals for the day, and that's awesome. If you
Yeah. And
don't
then,
have
yeah.
a treadmill, I'm never going to blame an athlete for staying inside and working on their strength training programs. And I'm talking to all of my athletes out there. Like, do some of those extra mobility days, do some of those extra strength days if it's not going to tax you for the next run. If you don't want to do a strength day, like spend some of that time that you would have otherwise been outside running, and do something for your physical well-being, whether that's yoga, maybe that's extra stretching, maybe that's sitting on the foam roller for 20 minutes. Maybe that's just deep breathing. Like, take that time that you already carved out for you and do something for you with it that will eventually keep building you into an overall like strong athlete, right? So don't get super wrapped up in like, I missed my run today. Get wrapped up in, did I work on my physical fitness today? Whatever that means. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that also, we don't get optimal days for going outside and playing in the snow and, going snowshoeing or ice skating or cross country skiing, those kind of things. Again, they're all a cardio, it's working our aerobic system. So go out, have fun, spend your time. Maybe it's mixing it up a little. Maybe you're going to spend a little time on the treadmill and you're going to do a little bit of cross country skiing or snowshoeing. You can still get it in and have it fun. It's not like this is going to happen every day of the year. We just have a few days of the year typically that we get into a little bit of, oh, what are we going to do because the conditions aren't great for me to go out for a run.
for sure. And like, if something's on the plan and you're like, oh, I'm going to skip this like hour-long run to do like an hour-long like cross-country ski session, like if that fires you up, go for it. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, like, people collecting heartbeats, enjoying their time outside, like regardless of the conditions, and like working on their physical fitness. Because I'm a huge believer that like our physical well-being is going to alter and enhance our mental well-being too. So if you already plan that time for you and you're like, I'm not feeling the run right now, but I'm feeling like, a good snowshoe, or as long as you're outside and you're off the couch, which hopefully you are and nobody has couches outside, like if you're getting up and you're walking around or working at any intensity other than just baseline intensity, you're doing a great job. Fully support.
Yep. Completely agree. So let's just hit on hydration
Yep.
or
I just wanted
dehydration.
dehydration, and how it impacts us when we're operating in these colder conditions. Of course, it's harder to drink things, right? Like, I've been on long runs where it's like your bottles are cold, like you're kind of cold, like, and you don't necessarily want to be drinking cold liquid while you're already kind of cold. But if you get dehydrated, your blood plasma volume goes down, your heart rate goes up, intensities, RPEs feel different. And it will impact your core temperature, for the negative, for sure. So if you keep properly hydrated, you're going to be better at regulating your core temperature. You're going to be, not like increasing your RPE while decreasing your pace for the same intensity. So however you can do it, like I know a lot of like bottles have pouches on the outside. So like if it's really cold out there and you know that like, hey, like I'm going to be out for 3 or 4 hours because I got this key long run, maybe stuff some of those hand warmers either in your bladder or on the pockets of your water bottle, just to keep it like at least a little bit warmer than ambient temperature. So can't stress enough to everybody out there, like don't skimp out on the dehydration, and it's only going to prolong recovery afterwards too.
Yeah.
So that's my little public service announcement about that.
Thank you. And, I just want to say, if you do have a big long run this weekend, maybe it's a 3 or 4 hour run and it's super cold out, you could consider splitting it up to, on, tomorrow and saying, I'm going to run, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, still getting that time on feet, but maybe not being out there in the cold so long at a time might be a good idea as well. But I also just want to hit this really quick, because Reese and I were talking this about frozen gnome. Course was slippery. You're using different muscles. So when we're out in these conditions, we might feel a little bit more sore than we typically would because of that. Do you want to just hit on that real quick and then we're out?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So When you have to stabilize heavily when it's slick out, your feet, like if you're typically running, they're going forwards, backwards. So we call that the sagittal plane in anatomy and physiology. So really, like running is just sagittally based. Same with cycling, it's just forwards, backwards. But now we're in these slick conditions and our legs are kind of shifting to the side, especially like if you're running frozen gnome and you're going around hairpin turns, like your foot steps and kind of slides out a little bit. So we have a greater propensity to tax our adductors, tax our other hip, like external rotators and abductors. So adductors are your kind of like your thigh and your groin muscles. So if anybody's running slick conditions, you got tight thigh muscles. That's kind of why. It's also more taxing on your hips for sure. And plus two, like your feet are going forwards and backwards like this, but all of a sudden you hit like a little incline and your foot just kind of slips back a little bit. That can also be taxing in a way that like, sure, it's not like a high force demand. It's not a high force requirement. But it is a power-based issue. And if your body's not used to exerting power in different planes of motion, say side to side, we call that the frontal plane. If your body's not used to exerting power in those directions, then we have a higher propensity to pull things. So yeah, I mean, that's just more credence for strength training and, like making sure that we touch on being like an overall like athlete, working side to side as well as front and back. That doesn't take a lot of time requirement either. I try not to, program more than like an hour total of strength training for the week. Most of the times it's more like 40 minutes for my athletes, but just touching on those planes of motion that like sure don't like specifically enhance your running, but if we can do a race and then recover from that race faster, you're just going to be able to put in more running workouts quicker, which will also make you a better athlete, a less injury prone athlete. I also had the problem at Frozen Gnome, you have all these micro slips where you kind of like your chest kind of gets thrown backwards and because you're going downhill, you kind of slide forwards a little bit. It
And
was
how about
definitely,
that finish? And how about that finish too?
oh yeah. So, okay. So like micro slips, it can be challenging on your core. So if you have like a, like a core soreness, that's probably where it's from. I decided to do what my girlfriend does at the finishing line and do like a little, I did like a little jump and taekwondo kick. Fact about me, like I'm a black belt in taekwondo. Although I've gotten a lot more stiff over the years as I have, become more of a runner than a martial artist. So I gave a little kick, foot planted in the ground, slid about 2 feet or so, and just landed square on my back. It's probably my
That
favorite.
definitely didn't stick the landing, but it was a good landing.
Yeah. So super fun. I think it just represents like, the funny, quirky nature of ultras, and the fact that like endurance sports will be your best friend 1 minute and then just lay you on your back the next. So yeah, I mean, like regardless of that, like say you slip and you go down, like you might be dealing with some more like acute impact traumas. Like I slid out and hit my shin bone. So my shin was just like not sore, not tender, but like I was like, oh yeah, I can feel like I fell on it on Frozen Gnome. Give it 2 or 3 days rest and it was fine. But yeah, so to your point, Loretta, like when we're running these slicker races, we definitely have a propensity to tax different muscles. So again, if you're not doing like a strength training protocol that incorporates lateral movements or adductor movements, definitely get on it. Like it's only going to help you out in the long run.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap for cold weather. So everybody stay warm, have fun in the snow if you have snow at your house, and have a great, go out there and stay warm, I guess.
Race, enjoy the cold weather. Like no such thing as bad weather, only bad preparation. Get out there, do your strength training. Like let's get faster. Let's get stronger.
All right. Bye.
Bye.